Okay, so I get this question a lot, and that is when I'm selling. If I'm selling my house, if you're selling your house to an investor, how do you know that that investor is really going to do what they say they're going to do? That is the question, right? How do you know they're a real investor? How do you know they're not just some fly-by-night moron? So there's a couple of ways to check and a couple of things that I can do to help you if you want to get me involved. First of all, there aren't that many people in Long Island who really can close on the property. And what you want is you want an investor who actually can close. It's very easy for someone to make an offer and who wants to, let's say, partner up with somebody else or who wants to assign the contract, wholesale the property. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if you're getting the price you want and you want to sell it, then that's fine. The problem is that investor can get caught in the middle if he is making representations to you as a seller and then his buyer doesn't come through. So the absolute most important tool that you can use to see if an investor is real is to ask for proof of funds, to see if they have the money. Now, almost every person that's making an offer is going to provide you with proof of funds, but you actually have to look at them. The question is it something actually from a bank statement, a statement from a bank, or is it a letter from a lender? The problem with statements from lenders is that they aren't really specific to your situation, and they could be old, and it doesn't really indicate that the guy can close because you don't know if the lender is going to lend on your property. Right? There could be a lot of factors that prevent the lender from lending on your property. Very often lenders have very, very strict guidelines, and your house may not meet it for whatever reason. So you want to ask for proof of funds and actually see money in the bank, enough money to cover the closing, right? And it doesn't mean that a major investor won't still borrow, right? I very often will borrow on a closing, but at least you know that if I have any problem with my lender, I can still close. That's crucial, right? So that's the number one way to check to see if an investor has the ability to do what he says he's going to do. Now, the truth is, if you want a list of other investors in Long Island or most parts of New York State, I can give them to you because I know most people who do this in any kind of significant way in most parts of the states. But the question of whether somebody's going to actually do what they say they're going to do is a little tricky. So sometimes, right, and it's happened to me for a couple of days, sometimes a closing has to be delayed. I really try every single time to get the seller the money they want to, but occasionally, sometimes I am borrowing and a lender pushes me off for a couple of days. That does happen. Sometimes title issues come up that complicate things. So that can happen to an honest person. Now, there are people who are, for lack of better words, full of crap and who are not going to do what they say they're going to do. So there are people like that too. So the only way to really know is what's really going to determine it is the strength of the contract. So the contract has to have no contingencies. The only reason why a buyer or an investor like me should be able to back out of a contract is because of some kind of title issue. So let me give you some examples of title issues that have come up. Recently got out of a deal because there was an easement, a scenic easement on the deal that prevented me from building on it. And that was something that was not disclosed at all. Title issues that come up sometimes are, somebody passed away that owned the property and there wasn't clear title to the current person that thought they were selling it. Sometimes liens or new liens or payoffs come up that the seller doesn't realize. Right, so those are typical title issues, and 99.9% of the time we can work through them. But I would say I've only gotten out of maybe one or two contracts in the 10 years I've been doing this because of a title issue that it prevented the seller. So I have no contingency. So if an investor is coming to you and asking for any contingencies, and I mean an inspection contingency, and I mean a financing contingency, any way for them to get out of the contract, it's usually a bad sign, right? My contracts are always no contingency whatsoever. So I would advise you to ask any investor that you're talking to, are you going to have any contingencies to get out of the contract? If they don't know what you're saying, I would run away, number one, because they probably don't know what they're doing. Number two, if they say, oh yeah, well I need a 14-day inspection contingency, that's just a sign of someone who doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, right? That happens a lot. So you want to avoid that. The next thing you want to ask is, hey, can you show me proof of funds, right? And if they show you a letter from a lender, I would say, it doesn't mean they're not going to close, but you can say to them, listen, this is a hard money lending approval. You still need to bring up some of your own money. I need to see proof of funds for your part of it. And if a guy says, listen, I can't show it, then I would say you should avoid it. Avoid that investor. So obviously the best is that he shows you something from a bank that can show that he can cover the entire purchase. If he shows you from a lender, then ask him at least, well, the lender's probably not lending you 100%. If he says something like my lender is lending 100%, I would be very, very concerned. So let me talk about some other things that unscrupulous investors do. So the biggest one that I've seen is that they tell you that you don't need an attorney. And they'll tell you that you can use their attorney. They'll recommend an attorney that you will never meet. Now, I've had plenty of sellers ask me to recommend attorneys, and I've recommended several attorneys to them, but they're always real people who speak to them or meet with them in person and actually represent their interests. You don't want a situation where an attorney is mysteriously representing you and is somehow someone you never meet. That does not instill any confidence in me. That usually means that that's an investor who wants the ability to get out of the contract, and there's really no deposit going on whatsoever. And that's just some guy who wants to get into the contract and see what he can do with it, and then if he wants out, can just say, sorry, I'm out. So you want to avoid any situation where the investor does not encourage you to get an attorney. Now, I've closed deals where the seller insisted on not having an attorney. I don't like doing those. I'll do them if you have to, but I really recommend every seller to be represented by an attorney because that's typical in New York. Now, we're the only state that does that, but I'd say it's important that you have representation. And even though it costs $1,000 or $2,000 and it's going to come out of your proceeds, it's still something that is worth it so that your interests are fully represented. Reminds me about something. Okay, so first, if anybody recommends you don't use an attorney, or use their attorney and they'll cover the fee, that's usually a sign of some shady things going on. Number two, you want to see proof of funds. And number three, you want to ask the investor even before the contracts get sent from your attorney. Remember, you as a seller are going to, your attorney is going to create the contract and generate the contract and send it to the investor's attorney. And then they're going to negotiate on a bunch of stupidity. That's just how it goes. They want to justify their exorbitant fees. So your attorney is going to create the contract, and your attorney is going to dictate the terms of the contract, right? If you're not using an attorney, you got to be very careful that the whole contract can be made to go away quickly. So those are really the ways to know that and again, there's no guarantees because there are people who don't do any of the things I just said who are still still unscrupulous. But if a guy has the money to close all cash on your property, he's willing to go on a non-contingent contract and no contingencies whatsoever, and he's recommending that you get represented by an attorney, that's a very good indication that the guy is going to do what he says he's going to do. He's going to do what he said he could do. That is a big indication because that means somebody has the ability to close because he's got the money. He wants you to be protected, and he's really got no outs. So that's pretty much as solid a deal as you can have from a seller's perspective. And again, these are things that we're doing, 4 or 5 times a month, and I think it's very, very important that when we talk to a seller, we make sure that the seller's interests are paramount, right? So very often I'll tell a seller, don't sell us the property. There's no reason for it. Or I'll tell the seller, you need to sell us the property, and this is exactly why. You have this problem that you don't. Some of the sellers don't realize the problems that they have. That they sort of they think they can list it on with an agent, and then I tell them you're going to list it and you're going to get killed later down the line, which is the worst thing. Nobody wants that to happen. Anytime we start a transaction, we want that transaction to close. But very often I'll tell sellers, you don't need to sell it to me. The house is, all the things you think are problems are not problems. We can get around it. I just took a listing today from somebody because they thought they needed to sell to an investor, and I'm like, the house is in great shape, and to be honest, with all transparency, I make less money when I list a property than when I buy a property. But if it's in the interest of the seller, I'm going to tell them the truth, and I think that is really what you want to look for in an investor: somebody who's telling you the truth, not somebody who's just telling you what you want to hear. So sellers tell me all the time, this house I can sell for $900,000, and I'll look at them and I'll go, I'll list it for that if you want, but there's no way in hell that I think it's going to sell for that. So you need people who are going to tell you the truth and not people who are going to tell you what they think you want to hear. But in all the previous examples, those things, you may not even understand what they mean. So very, 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 very rarely do I get asked for proof of funds. I can provide them, but I think every time somebody's selling to an investor, they should ask for proof of funds. I think it's important, and I think it really will separate the good investors who can do what they say they will do from the investors who can't. So I hope this is helpful. My number should be on the screen somewhere. If you need any help selling a property, really anywhere in New York State. I'm here to help. I operate downstate, but I work with people all over the state, and I am looking to help sellers in any way that I can. Thank you very much.